reviewing this book here, moving What is Life? Understand Biology in 5 Steps, the green book. So, he talks a lot about yeast because that's one of his kind of areas of interest. And he looks at for substances in yeast that carry out the chemical reaction of fermentation, which are essentially enzymes. Now, enzymes are not themselves consumed by the reaction. They're a catalyst, so they facilitate chemical reactions. And most enzymes are proteins. Most enzymes are made from proteins, which are built by the cell as long chain-like molecules called polymers. Polymers are essentially the fundamental kind of what we're all built out of. We're built out of polymers. As well as most enzymes and all other proteins, all lipid molecules that make up cell membranes, all fats and carbohydrates, and DNA and RNA are all polymers. And they're built from atoms of 5 chemical elements, but carbon plays the main role. So polymers are built principally from atoms of just 5 chemical elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. But carbon is the most versatile. And this is because hydrogen atoms make only one connection or chemical bond with other atoms, but each carbon atom can bond to 4 other atoms, which then creates a chain of linked atoms, and that's at the core of each polymer. Now, many of the polymers found in cells are very large molecules. These are known as macromolecules. For example, DNA itself, which is a macromolecule, containing millions of carbon atoms. Now, protein polymers are not quite so long. They're based on a few hundred linked carbon atoms, but they're more chemically variable than DNA, and so they can work as an enzyme. Each protein is a carbon-based polymer built by joining smaller amino acid molecules together into long chains. And life uses 20 different amino acids. Each amino acid has a side molecule branching off from the main polymer chain. For example, positive or negative charge, which contains positive or negative charges. It's all electricity. By stringing together different combinations of amino acids, cells can create a huge range of protein polymer molecules. Now, enzymes also act as quality controllers. They look out for invaders and activate proteins that defend cells. Nearly every part of our body are either made from protein or constructed by protein. There's a huge amount of protein diversity. Proteins are responsible for many chemical reactions. Some of the molecules of protein are electrically charged. Some are acids and some are alkalis. But the elementary components of protein are carbon polymers. The smallest chemical compartments within cells are the surfaces of the enzyme molecules. And they're made from thousands of connected atoms. At a larger scale than individual enzymes, groups of proteins can dock with each other physically and become, for example, ribosomes, where the proteins themselves are made. Each ribosome is made from proteins together with several large molecules of RNA. To build a new protein molecule, a ribosome must read the genetic code of genes and translate it into the 20-letter amino acid alphabet of proteins. To do this, the cells make temporary copies of the gene. The copy is made from RNA. The RNA acts as a messenger because it is physically transported from the genes into the nucleus to the ribosome, taking copies of the gene's information with it, and then the ribosome uses the messenger RNA as a template to build protein. The carbon that is so crucial for the construction of every part of our bodies, of course, comes from photosynthesis. It starts out as carbon dioxide, which is drawn out of the air by photosynthesis, of course, so plants are very, very important here. The single-celled microbes were the very first life forms. They got their energy from geothermal sources, not photosynthesis. So at the beginning of time, there was no major source of oxygen, of course. There was almost no oxygen in the atmosphere in the beginning of life. Now, oxygen is a highly chemically reactive gas. It can damage other chemicals, including the polymers essential for life, like DNA. The amount of oxygen spiked once microbes evolved the ability to photosynthesize. This is known as a great oxygen catastrophe. Most creatures were wiped out by the appearance of oxygen. So it's rather ironic that the oxygen that we now need to survive initially was absolutely lethal, but this was necessary as part of evolution. If this didn't happen, we wouldn't have evolved. Because now we entirely depend on oxygen because we need it to release energy from sugar, fat and protein in cellular respiration, which is a chemical reaction taking place in mitochondria. And this reverses the reaction at the core of photosynthesis. Sugar and oxygen react with each other, resulting in water and carbon dioxide, and this releases a lot of energy, which is then captured for later use. The energy capturing step is based on the movement of protons, which are single atoms of hydrogen that have been stripped of an electron to give an electrical charge. Protons are pushed out from the centre of a mitochondrion into the gap between the two membranes that enclose the mitochondria. The protons pumped beyond the membrane then rush back into the centre of the organelle via channels made of protein, which capture the force created by the cascade of charged particles and store it in a form of high-energy chemical bonds. This then creates a new molecule of a substance called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is life's energy source. Each molecule of ATP stores energy like a battery. When a chemical reaction in a cell needs energy, the cell breaks the ATP's high-energy bonds, turning ATP into adenosine diphosphate, a process that releases energy. So life is powered by ATP. Most of the food that we eat ends up being processed in the cell's mitochondria, and this uses the chemical energy it contains to make ATP, which is life's battery. If there is anything like a vital spark that sustains life, it is this tiny flow of electric charge across a membrane. Okay, I'm not going to read out every single bit because that'll take a long time, but you probably get the idea of what's in this book. He then talks a lot about information and how life forms are essentially informational, not just chemical machines, but also informational machines, because they have to act on the information that comes in via their senses. Knowledge is the info brought together from the senses, and it has to be meaningful, resulting in an outcome. Meaningful activity based on information, which is at the core of life, acting with purpose, which enables the animal to decide what to do next to achieve a specified goal. So he looks at life at the level of information. He looks also a little bit at viruses. There's a debate, are viruses alive, are they dead? He argues that viruses are alive because they're chemical entities with a genome. They can evolve by natural selection. They cannot, however, reproduce themselves. They need to reproduce. They can only reproduce once they've hijacked a living cell, which is often the bit about viruses that leads people to say they're not alive. However, all life forms depend on each other. So saying that viruses aren't truly alive just because they have to depend on another organism in order to fulfill their cycle doesn't necessarily hold water when you think about how every single organism in existence is interdependent on other organisms for their survival to some extent. It's a bit like a sort of spectrum, I guess, with plants being one of the more independent life forms, and some forms of bacteria being almost completely independent, right through to viruses who are completely dependent. And he talks a lot about you know, how we're all ultimately related, obviously, like the tree of life, you know, all life forms is one big family, we're all connected to one another, at a fundamental level, we're completely related to one another, you know, we're related, once you go back in time far enough, we all have the same common ancestor. It's very important to hang on to that, just to know how essentially we're all one big family of life that is both related and also interdependent. So I guess he ties that in with, you know, more pressing concerns about climate change and our relationship with the natural world as well. So I hope you enjoyed this sort of whistle-stop tour through reviewing this book, and do let me know what you think if you're interested in biology, and if you've read any interesting books on biology, I'll be interested to know. So thank you for watching.